Thanks to Marissa from Ohio Atheists for flying me out here for this. It's I got here and I realized you guys had Frank Zindler right in your back pocket, and that you still invited me out is extremely flattering. And to share a stage with people like Ron and Sam Salerno and Mark and Marnie, it makes me feel a bit pretentious sharing a stage with them, and I feel like it's a reminder that pseudo-internet fame doesn't always accompany the people who do the best or the hardest work. So thank you. It's very flattering for me to be here. Again. So I want to talk today about arguing with religious people, because it's pretty much what I do for a living, and they say stick to what you know. And it's really important because I remember Mark talking about seeing the billboards on the highway. I mean, if you drive for any amount of time in the United States, you're going to see billboards that say, "Come to our church or burn forever," as if "do what I say or I'll light you on fire" is a moral framework of any kind. What you won't see are billboards that say, "Come to our church, we have evidence," which I think demonstrates a very clear distinction in the way we approach trying to change people's minds. And if we're going to change people's minds in a responsible way, we need to do it in a way that appeals to them, in a way that isn't threatening them with eternal hellfire. So if there's anything special about me, and I don't think there's much, I write a blog for a living, it's that while I may lack the genius of a Frank Zindler or a Richard Carrier, I'm smart enough to understand the religious arguments and yet dumb enough to talk about them in plain English. So that's what I'm going to go for today. First off, raise your hand if you've ever heard someone say of arguing with religious people, "Why do you even bother? You never make any progress." Never change anybody's mind. Every time I hear that, I want to vomit blood. It just drives me so nuts. And the reason is, try this. How many of you used to be religious? Raise your hands. People change their minds. And they change their minds because of arguments, and there's no other way it could happen. How many of you heard a religious person tell you have to choose to believe in Jesus? Right? Groan. This is impossible. You don't choose your beliefs. Your beliefs are the product of whatever facts are rattling around your head, and you're powerless to do anything else. For instance, if any of you walked to the edge of the roof of a skyscraper and tried to convince yourself by force of will that gravity doesn't work, you couldn't do that. Your mind is already made up for you. So what does this tell us? Well, it tells us, for one thing, if God designed us with those brains and then demanded we believe someone rise from the dead in order to get into hell, he's an asshole. But it also tells us that this is how people change their minds, against their will, because they have no other choice. This is why most people who leave religion do so painfully, not wanting to change their mind, but just having no other option. And we can get those facts into their head if we argue intelligently. So we can change people's minds. Why do we need to? Because I argue with religious people for a living, I get a lot of emails from people saying, "Why do you hate religion so much?" And I tell them, it's not that I hate religion, it's that I think being reasonable, or trying to be reasonable, is a moral obligation. And it's just that religion's the ones running around telling people you don't have to be reasonable. It doesn't matter what you believe is true so long as you believe it. Why do I think reason's a moral obligation? Well, if you read that, I'm allergic to this whole state. I'm allergic to Earth, thanks Obama. If you read the news for any amount of time, you'll realize that every month, every 2 months, you'll read about a child who got sick, dying from some preventable illness. The one I always like to talk about is, see, I forget her name now even. Wait, no, stop. Oh, a tablet. Even in the future, nothing works. Oh my God, I hate everything. The one I like to talk about is Madeline Newman. Well, there's a sign we're out here.
That works. I think your tablet's interfering with the electronics.
I think God is interfering with the electronics. He's scared of me.
It's a Christian jammer.
So they gave up on prayer and turned to technology. It's about time. Speaking of which, Madeline Newman, she gets sick. She's 11 years old. Winds up curled up on her bedroom floor for 2 weeks, skin turning purple, severe pain, and winds up dying from type 1 diabetes, which is completely treatable. And I don't have to explain to anybody here why. At no point in that whole 2-week period did her parents pick up the phone and summon an ambulance, because they thought that doing so would be tantamount to challenging God, and they didn't want to do that. Now, if you read about people who essentially neglect their child to death, I don't think it would be improper to say that they were monsters. I mean, if the word bad is to have any meaningful definition, people who neglect their child to death are bad. When I'm reading about these people, there's something that really strikes me. It's that how similar they are to me. Because those parents loved their child as much as I would love my child. They wanted their daughter to get well as much as I would want my daughter to get well. The problem with them wasn't lack of compassion or malice. It's simply that they had a bad idea about how the universe worked. And once they had that bad idea, all of the compassion in the world wasn't enough to save them. In fact, their compassion is what drove them to do this, because they had this bad idea. And that's why I think reason is so important for people who have good intentions, which I think is pretty much everybody. Muslims, Jews, Christians, atheists. We all have good intentions. We all have compassion. If you have that, then you owe it to yourself, and you owe it to your neighbors here on planet Earth to do your best to be reasonable so that your good intentions aren't corrupted by bad ideas. And that's why religion draws so much of my attention. If you care about what is true, which everybody should, you should be able to defend your religion in terms of evidence and reason as to why it's true. So let's talk about some of the reasons people give for God being, for their belief in God being true. The first thing that will trip up a lot of people is when you start criticizing someone's belief in God, they'll immediately tell you, you need to respect my beliefs. Which always strikes me as weird, because if someone thinks I'm wrong about someone, what does respect look like to me? It's certainly not treating me as if I'd rather continue being wrong than face the possibility that I might be wrong. No, respect to me means coming to me and telling me, hey, I think you're wrong for X, Y, and Z reasons. That is respect. In fact, I just got to, on the flight here out of Kansas City, I wound up sitting next to a prison minister. And of course, because that's always the first question that gets asked on an airplane, what do you do for a living? An interesting story, I used to pussyfoot around this. What do you do for a living? I'm a writer. What do you write about? Religion. What do you, fuck, I'm an atheist writer, leave me alone. And that's always when I get like, oh, where do you get your morals from? I'm so sorry, did Jesus shake hole in your heart? But I find when they ask me what I do for a living, I say, oh, I'm an atheist writer. I write about how God doesn't exist for a living. It's pretty cool. That's when they like, oh, and they treat me as a human being. In fact, once upon a time, I sat next to a evangelist that goes all over the world. What do they call them?
Missionaries?
Missionaries, thank you. And so what do you do for a living? I'm like, oh, I'm an atheist writer. She said, oh, I'm so sorry. I was like, I'm not. I get to sleep in on Sundays. It's pretty rad. She looked at me like I just kicked her cat or something. But anyway, this guy I was sitting with, tried this on me. I feel there's not a lot of respect from atheists. I'm like, no. When we tell you why we think you're wrong, that is respect. We expect you to have the fortitude to be able to withstand some mild criticism in the interest of coming to an agreement. I don't think I got him on that, but I got him on something else. But we'll talk about that later, maybe. Okay, so point is, respecting people is communicating with them honestly. It's treating them the same way you would want to be treated. Okay. Oh, God damn it, I have technology. I mean, darn is what I meant to say. These buttons have to be like small enough you have to hit them with a toothpick. Okay. We'll get. I'm sure Mark and Marnie got a lot of this. Atheists are big meanies. Even if it were true, so what? We could be fucking murderers. It wouldn't make us wrong. Argue with us. Don't just tell us we're horrible. Another one. Science can't explain what the hell ever. Now, a lot of people would let that go right by without pointing out that the problem is the word can't. Science can't explain whatever. Maybe science hasn't explained whatever, but hasn't is a very different word than can't. And what's more, there is a proper way to deal with things we don't know. It's to say, I don't know. I mean, our society thrives based on how much we remove ignorance from it. Ignorance is not a good thing. The more we know, the more we have medicine and clean water and plentiful food and transportation to get to the park, to have parties and free porn online. So lack of ignorance is a very good thing. And that's why I say to Christians who try this, science can't explain it, therefore it's God. By doing that, you are treating God like our ignorance. Like, for one, it's not very flattering to God, but two, it's not helping your case very well. So yeah, there's certainly a way to deal with what we don't know, and that's to openly and freely admit it. Otherwise, you're treating God like this thing we're trying to sunder from our society. Another one, you can't prove God exists. We heard that one? Can't prove God exists? You know, a good way to answer that used to be like, oh, you can't prove Smurfs don't exist, and you don't believe in Smurfs, obviously. But I found that religious people have heard this one enough where they think that, yeah, but Smurfs aren't real and God is a good response. So lately I've taken to trying something else. Whenever someone says, you can't prove God doesn't exist, the next words out of my mouth are, you're a thief. I say, what, I'm a thief? Like, you're a thief. You steal shit from people. Stop doing that. They say, well, I'm not a thief. I say, well, prove you're not a thief. And the next words out of their mouth are invariably, well, there's no evidence that I'm a... But it takes them off their script, and it makes them think. You know, when I'm arguing with a religious person, what I'm looking for is that moment where they pause, like, oh, my script doesn't address that. Oh, fuck. That's when I get the email 6 months later, like, oh, yeah, you know, you were right about this. Ken Ham. I got my PowerPoint over here. The slide here has a picture of Ken Ham with the speech bubble that says, were you there? Okay, we've heard that one, good. I just want to take a bucket of shit and just go like wipe it all over his house. And then like just go stand by the gate and have him come out and be like, were you the one, you rubbed shit all over my house? Like, were you there? And there's shit all over your hands, like, were you there?
He's got the surveillance cameras.
But he wasn't there. That's a great argument, Dr. Zindler, but he wasn't there. What I'll usually get after I've shot down a few arguments is read the Bible. Like, all the answers are there, right? Right. Fuck me wrong. No. I hate this. By the way, we're kind of informal here, so if anyone has an argument for God's existence they've heard and it perplexes them, just raise your hand. Don't feel like you'd be interrupting my speech. So sorry. This, I could just do it this way. I'm from Arkansas. We just got indoor plumbing there, so tablets are magic to me. I feel like this is like body shaming, but when Mark said they got the comment like, oh, these guys aren't fit for GQ, I'm like, you ever been to the hyper-religious South? There's a lot of religious people in the world that aren't fit for GQ either, buddy. Turn on Jerry Springer sometime. Okay. Sorry, this is jocking my flow. Okay. Read the Bible. All the answers are in there. One, I have read the Bible. But Bill Keller Ministries did a survey, I think back in 2007, that found that 10% of professing Christians had read the Bible in its entirety. This is pretty hilarious when you put it up against other studies, like Knowledge Networks at the behest of Christianity Today did another study that found that 74% of professing Christians believe the Bible is the authoritative guide to morality. Makes me wish there had been some bit in there and said don't pretend to have read things you haven't. It's not like they would have read it, but maybe it would have helped in some other sense. Pew Forum for Religion and Public Life did a study in September of 2010 that found that on the whole, atheists knew more about the various religions than the adherents of those religions. For instance, what was the percentage? Something like 45% of Catholics didn't know it was actual church doctrine that the Eucharist, the cracker and the grape juice or wine, whatever, actually turns into the flesh and blood of Jesus. Catholics actually didn't know that. Atheists, of course, we know that. Something like 50% or thereabouts of Christians couldn't recognize Martin Luther as the guy that kicked off the Protestant Reformation. And atheists knew that. So when Christians tell me, hey, you need to read the Bible, all the answers are in there, I'm like, who are you to tell me to read the Bible, right? But maybe the biblical ignorance makes sense. What's the Bible, 1,200 pages? It's a lot of reading. But then I think how many Christians have read 2 Harry Potter books or 2 Twilight books? And I don't think it's unfair of me to expect God to be as good a communicator as J.K. Rowling. I don't think that's asking too much. So what then they'll say is that, but look at science. Science has confirmed that God exists, right? Because we live in the 21st century, and look around you. Even we're out here in the middle of the frickin' woods. There's technology everywhere. We can't live with people on their cell phones. They can go service in the middle of the woods. Why not? If you're going to have a religion in the 21st century, If you're going to have a religion in the 21st century, it cannot conflict with science. It's a death sentence for your religion. So Christians have to tell us that their religion, no, sure, science doesn't preclude Christianity. Well, the thing is that it does. Because if you believe a guy rose from the dead, you don't know shit about biology. If you believe a man walked on water, you don't know shit about physics. If you believe that someone was converted into a pillar of salt, chemists might just take issue with you. And if you believe there was a global flood, geologists might just take issue with you. And even if the geologists didn't, the historians would. Because plenty of civilizations, like Egypt's 6th dynasty, which were around when this global flood was supposed to have taken place, left copious records of their civilization, somehow missed being exterminated by a global flood. Maybe the Egyptians were just really resilient people, right? Really good swimmers. Fucking fish.
And the papyri weren't water damaged either.
Well, and what? You mean that's not true? Damn. What they don't understand is that it's okay to be ignorant of science. Like
Yay, science! I am real.
You're really annoying. Shut up. It's okay to defer to experts. For instance, I fly around the country and give talks. Every time, I don't understand how airplanes work, like magic as far as I'm concerned. But it doesn't matter that I don't understand. Somewhere, physicists and engineers do understand how it works, and that's good enough for me. Everyone who's eating a cheeseburger here today probably doesn't understand how bacteria work, Frank Zindler being the exception, but are okay eating a cheeseburger because someone somewhere does. And that's fine. And even Christians live their lives this way. Like they're okay, using the internet to tell me how God exists, all while disparaging science. Like you're using the internet. But that's true up until they get to what science says about people rising from the dead and walking on water. Then all of a sudden suspicion starts to creep in, and I just wonder, how does that make any sense? I mean, what do you think? Do you think science is the greatest coup in the history of mankind? That they've just been leading us along for thousands of years, making life better with every generation, answering the mysteries of the universe, only so that just now they can mislead us on the origin of life and evolution? Is this really what you think? And then they'll go right to, well, look at the universe. Doesn't it look designing? Look at these trees. Human beings can't make a tree. It all looks so designed. And the problem with that is they think that organization and order can only be produced by the watchmaker, someone that makes order. But the thing is, we know how the universe produces order all by itself. And take snowflakes, for example. Snowflakes are far more complex than liquid water. They're highly organized, but no one feels the need to invoke a snowflake-making god because we know the natural processes that create that order all by themselves. Stars are another example. If you have a big enough cloud of hydrogen, and big enough that it starts producing gravity, it'll pull itself together, which will spike the pressure in the middle, it will spike the temperature, and you'll have a far more complex star than what you had before. It's a process called the Jeans instability. You can look it up. And I will say no one feels the need to invoke a snowflake-making god, or a star-making god, because I've made Genesis. Also, it turns out stars came before the Earth. Who knew? But we know that the universe is capable of producing order all by itself. So it does the religious person no good to point to an example of order and say, this one, this piece of order, this one must be God. Anyone heard the presuppositional arguments recently? Anyone? One person online? These are the new hotness amongst apologetics.
Is that like William Lane Craig and that kind of stuff?
Every argument is like William Lane Craig. Like he just throws enough shit at the wall until some of it sticks. Who? You must not be named, that guy. So essentially what we're doing with presuppositional apologetics is your brain is made up of atoms, right? It's nothing but atoms, and atoms can't think. So how can you think if you don't have a soul, right? Or how can you know your thoughts are reliable? Well, here's the deal. Matter arranged in the right way can perform logical processes. Like if you took your desktop computer at home and just completely disassembled it, you'd have a industry and technology. If you took your desktop computer home and disassembled it, you'd have a whole bunch of different pieces that can't perform logical processes on their own. But if you assemble them in the right way, they can perform logical processes and think, right? So if we get matter into the right configuration, it can think to an extent. And our brains are certainly that way. So what they'll say then is, ha 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 ha, you need a human being to put a computer together. So you need a designer before matter can think. Well, no, it turns out. The reason computers don't build themselves, and paintings don't paint themselves, and buildings don't build themselves, is because they're not made of molecules that self-replicate. But human beings and animals are. DNA, right? And if you have self-replicating molecules under three forces, you're always going to have improved organization and, what's what I'm looking for? Adaptation over time. Those forces are reproduction, which we do, selection, which we have, and mutation, which we're subject to. As long as you have those three forces and self-replicating molecules, you'll get not necessarily something like people, but organisms that can at least work better within their environment. So what's up next? This is so weird doing a PowerPoint, like just looking at it here. I'll just skip to the good parts.
Why didn't you write a talk that the whole thing was a good part?
Because I'm not Jesus. At least to my knowledge. What?
Are you sure about that?
You know, I wasn't there, so... Oh, this is good. How many of you guys have heard this one? But I feel the Lord's presence. When I pray, I feel God. And, actually, I was explaining to the table earlier, that's why I wear 2 rubber bands around my wrist to beat that argument. Hold on.
Be back.
What? All my opera training will be good for something, because now I can project. So whenever a religious person says to me, like, I feel God when I pray, or I feel God's presence in my life, I take these 2 rubber bands off and I say, watch this. So, sorry if anyone in the back can't see. Got 1 rubber band here, another rubber band in here. So I've kind of got them caged in there like that, so I can't even pull them apart. Now watch. I'm just going to rub them together like this and watch. You can watch one melt right through the other. Cool, right? So I say to the religious person, you just saw those 2 rubber bands melt through one another. Do you think it's magic? Or do you assume that there is a natural explanation that you simply don't know? That's obvious. They assume there's a natural explanation they don't know. And so I say to them, why do you assume that when you pray and you get these fuzzy, warm feelings, that it's magic, that a God who could communicate with you as clearly as I could thought that's the best way to have a relationship with you? And not just that that's naturally what happens in the brain when you pray, that there's a natural explanation that you simply do not know. So learn a magic trick, then debate. Actually, I'm just going to go without the microphone. Fuck you. I mean, this is how magic got invented. The first time someone realized how easy it was to dupe people, right?
But that was religion.
That's when the first sucker met the first con man. All right. The moral argument. You guys, I get this all the time. You atheists are terrible people. It doesn't matter how charitable you are. You're horrible people. And the argument is, you can't do morality. You can't figure out morality without a God telling you what to do, right? And the way this is most purely distilled is to say you can't get an ought from an is. Like, you can know everything about the world, but you can't derive what you ought to do from that knowledge. Except you can. We do this all the time. For instance, if you want your car to run, you ought to change the oil, right? Now, what if you're testing some kind of new engine that's supposed to run without oil? Well, then you ought not to change the oil in your car, right? But what we ought to do is based off what we want. If you want to smell good, you ought to take a shower. Now, a few things have to be true. I mean, you must want to be clean, and the shower shouldn't like melt off your skin or something else you don't want. But if those things are true, then the statement you ought to take a shower is true. So when we're talking about what we ought to do morally, we need to figure out what desire moral rules are fulfilling us. What do we want? And I think the answer is really simple. We all want to be happy, right? This is why we go to atheist picnics and we have jobs that we hate, because we'd rather have food and a house than be homeless, right? Pretty much everything we do in life is based on trying to make ourselves less miserable or happier. And even religious people look at it this way. This is why they create a hell that everybody wants to go to and a hell that nobody wants to go to, right? Right? But this can be turned on its head. Like, why should I do what the Bible tells me to do? Well, because then you'll go to hell. What if I want to go to hell? What ought I to do then? How could they possibly appeal to you at that point? What if hell's where the party is, right? I'm pretty sure hell is where my wife is going. I don't want to go to heaven. Then they've got no way to appeal to you because they can only appeal to what you want. Now, the answer to that will be, well, JT, what about psychos, right? They're just doing what makes them happy, and it turns out to be killing other people. Well, this is true, but they're a very small portion of the population. I turned you off! I turn it off. Story of my life. My dating life, anyway. Psychos are a very small portion of society, and if the rest of us are to be happy, it's in our best interest to wall them off from the rest of society, to put them behind bars, to put them in treatment, which is what we do. It confirms the secular moral underpinnings, not the religious. What's more, for most of us, being happy is dependent on making other people happy. I don't know about you, whenever I see a gruesome scene in a horror movie, I cringe, or whenever I drive by a wreck, I cringe. And then, on the other side of that coin, there's a reason smiles are contagious. We share the well-being of everybody around us. We're a social species. It's in our genetics. Like, if we're to maximize our own happiness, we have to try to make other people happy. So it doesn't make sense to say, like, oh, you can make yourself happy by trampling over others. You can point out that people steal stereos, and that makes them happy. But you can point out through the entirety of the work in the discipline of psychology that people who steal actually aren't that happy. And just, you can think about how that works. How many of you have had something stolen from you? Everyone who didn't raise their hand, that fucking bird, is a liar. We've all had something stolen from us. And I don't know about you, but I remember hating the person that stole from me. And if I were to steal, I would necessarily become the type of person that I would hate. That's no way to live a happy life. And once you realize that, you have all the motivation you need not to steal or murder or kill your neighbors and rape their pets and steal their pornography or whatever it is they say atheists do. Eat babies. And what's more, you can even see this in other species. In 1964, Jules Masterman at the University of Chicago, I think, did a study with rhesus monkeys where he put a bunch of rhesus monkeys in a cage where in order to get fed, they had to pull a lever that would shock one of their cage mates. Now, these rhesus monkeys don't believe in God, but they started starving themselves, and some of them starved themselves for, I think, 14 days at a time, just to avoid hurting their cage mates. Compassion is in our DNA! Thank you for proving my point. But even if none of that were true, even if none of that made sense, your argument cannot be that in order to be moral, we need things like the story of Abraham and Isaac. For those of you fortunate enough to have not wasted time reading the Bible, the story of Abraham and Isaac is where God tells Abraham, like, I want you to kill your son. And Abraham says, sure. Yeah, like, you all grow like, oh, that's so hilariously stupid. Who would believe that? Turns out most Americans believe that. And if you go to any church, even liberal denominations, the story of Abraham and Isaac is taught with Abraham as the hero because he was so willing to obey God, he was willing to kill his child. That's some sick shit. Even if God came down, hold on, I'm preaching here. Even if God came right down to earth into my face and told me to kill my son, even though I would know he existed, I would know he was the ultimate power in the universe, the next words out of my mouth would be, fuck you. Yeah. Even if you exempt Abraham by God coming down later saying, just kidding, troll, like, the fact that he was willing makes him a villain, not a hero, and we don't need that story to be moral, and we certainly don't need people who think he was the hero to get there. We don't need Old Testament barbarity. Exodus 35:2, kill anybody who works on Saturday, which was the traditional Sabbath. Write it down. Kill anybody who works on Saturday. Now what you'll hear is, yeah, but Jesus came and he made all that shit better, right? When someone says that, what I hear is, you know what? At one time, that was the moral thing to do. Which is ridiculous. There was never a time when killing someone for working on the wrong day was the moral thing to do. And you can, like, people who say that have just had the Jesus came and changed it drilled into their heads. They don't see the immorality of it. But if you point out to them, like, what you're saying is that you think it could be moral to kill someone for working on the wrong day just a few thousand years ago. Like, you can show them how Christianity has corrupted their moral sense. What's another one? The idea that belief can supersede compassion. Like, Take someone like Osama bin Laden, responsible for thousands of deaths in the course of his life. If he believed in Jesus 5 minutes before he died, according to most Christians, he'd wind up in heaven. Now take someone like me. Like, I'm not morally perfect. I think the last time I stole something was a pack of bubble gum way back in the day when I was like 7. I've certainly never killed anybody. But someone like me, who has certainly lived a more compassionate life, could be less deserving of eternal paradise than son of a bitch like him. That's about as far away from morality and moral sense as you can get. Or even the concept of hell. In our justice system, we put people behind bars to protect others from them, to rehabilitate them. We punish to provide a lesson, to help people learn. We don't punish eternally just for revenge, or that's not justice. So even if we had no secular underpinnings for morality, we don't need the Bible. And the important thing to note there is, and this is from Sam Harris, when religious people read passages like the one in Exodus, kill people for working on the Sabbath, it's them who reject it. They realize that's immoral for the most part. It's important to point out that if you're the one making the moral calls, if you can read it in the Bible and realize that it's immoral, you don't need the Bible. You're coming up with morality all by yourself, and that's a good thing. Does religion make people better? In the real world, if you want to be forgiven, you generally have to atone for it. You have to work to make it right. If forgiveness is given automatically, it doesn't do a whole lot for changing you. But also, what is the prison population with atheists? 0.02%? Something ridiculously small like that? I've actually got some slides on here, which I can't read because I'm having to do it small. But they're from the Bureau of Prison Statistics, where they talk to a bunch of prisoners, polling them on religion. Like, one of them said, like, I used to say a prayer to Jesus before I committed a crime, just so he and I knew we were still cool. Belief in Jesus doesn't generally do a whole lot for making people better. What's more, God, as a moral being, is incredibly suspect. The slide I've got here is unforgivable. The slide I've got here is a starving child. And if I were to have it up on a screen, you'd probably have the same visceral reaction I do to it. I mean, your heart would sink if you could save that child just based on the picture. You most certainly would. If you had an orange to give him, you would. And if you were looking at that child, you'd give him the shirt off your back. You'd give him any means to make that child's life better or to save it from starvation. God can see those children, supposedly. Every single one of them. And that's the main difference between God and atheists. If atheists can do something to end suffering, we do. And I don't think it's presumptuous to expect God, at least morally and compassionately, to be better than mortals. Even some of the worst mortals would still do that for the child. But God has a plan. Yes, the next slide! You just want to come give this talk? God has a plan, and part of that plan is free will, right? That's why people suffer, because God loves free will so fucking much. It doesn't matter if we're shitty to one another and allow children to starve, He can't intervene with free will. But there's a couple issues there. The first one, hurricanes kill people. Human beings didn't make those hurricanes, and they have nothing to do with how shitty we are to one another, all right? Earthquakes, hurricanes, meteors striking cars at random. Like, there's all kinds of ways that people suffer that has nothing to do with people's free will. But the other thing to point out is that we don't need every option in order to have free will, right? Sam. Hi. Welcome to the show. You couldn't jump over this pavilion right now, right?
Wish I could, but no.
Yeah, back when I was young. The fact that you couldn't jump over this pavilion has no bearing on your free will, right? Because you still have other choices. You can still choose whether to have a donut or a cheeseburger, right? Yes. You don't need to have every choice. No, they're not.
I want my free will. Where's your free will now?
Next year. Tell them to be more people if we have punch and pack. But the thing is, we can't just choose to grow 4 arms. There's so many things we can't do, but we still have free will because we have certain choices, even if we don't have all the choices. So what can we do in the course of a day, right? We can play basketball. We can organize picnics. We can pet puppies, own birds. we can't convert the pavilion into a unicorn with the power of our minds. It's just an ability we don't have, but it's okay. We still have free will. So how does this look to God? Okay, we can eat apples, we can drive cars, and we can have gay sex. Now,
Thank God.
right?
You're welcome, I'm sure.
Oh, my cursed straightness. My parents are gay rights activists, I'm a gay rights activist. There'd be literally no one who would have less to lose by coming out as bisexual than me, and I just can't, it's not a choice. I would have made that choice ages ago. But the point is, he could remove gay sex from the equation. He could have every human being born with full knowledge that God exists, and we would still have free will, so we would still have all these other choices, right? We've already established that not having every choice doesn't negate free will. But he leaves them there. This is a God that is trying to open doors into hell, not shut them. Oh, whoa. Okay. All right. So, wow, I must know this talk pretty good because I've just been going without slides for 10 minutes. Yeah, is that nobody's bored yet? They asked me how long are you speaking. I was like, I don't know. I'll speak till everyone stops laughing at my jokes. They're looking bored. Call it a day.
So another 2 minutes.
Well, I know Frank Zindler's coming up after me, so I'm like doing everything I can to keep you engaged. Like, when's Frank coming up? Oh, here's another one. But my beliefs changed my life. I used to be all hung up on drugs. Now I'm all hung up on the Lord. We get this one. Every priest, like, oh, I was a sinner and Jesus changed my life. And the thing is, they're telling the truth. I believe that their beliefs did change their life. But the thing is, a belief doesn't have to be true to change someone's life. Children across the country are much better behaved in the month of December. Beliefs, even inaccurate beliefs, have the power to change people's minds. Pointing out that it changed your mind, it doesn't do anything to confirm that it's true. And if you think reason is a moral obligation like I do, you need to give a shit about whether or not it's true. How many of you have seen my talk from Skepticon a couple years ago where I popped the question? A few people? Okay, so even without this argument has particular meaning to me, because it was on this slide that I asked my now wife to marry me, and she said yes. That's a good thing. An argument I get a lot from religious people is what about love? You don't have any evidence for love, and yet you believe love exists. Well, God is like love, even though we don't have any evidence. You know, God exists, and you should believe it. First thing I say is, so you're admitting we don't have any evidence for God. The other thing to point out is that love is a state of the brain. I made Frank in the laugh. Highlight of the day. Drop the mic, I'm done. Actually, I remember, oh God, I'll tell a quick story, then I'll get back to this argument. One of my first main stage speaking gigs was at the 2011 American Atheist Convention. And I was so excited because I was supposed to follow Christopher Hitchens. Now, I don't fanboy that much. People are just people to me. I was going to green room fanboy the shit out of him. I'd already known. And it was the first gig he had to cancel because he was sick. Yeah, and I felt guilty because my first response was, God damn it. Then I was like, oh, man, that's self-centered. He's got cancer. He's not going to get to meet him. I felt like a real asshole because I'm an atheist and I have no moral compass. But so I gave my talk, and here comes this guy up with this stack of books. And he's like, that talk was amazing, and I want you to have this. I think you've got a real future in the atheist movement. And I was like, oh, like some shitty author wrote some books and he wants me to look at them. Awesome, thanks, buddy. So I got home and I was reading through. I was like, this isn't half bad. YouTube, like Frank, he's done a lot of shit. And I realized later this was Frank Zindler who had given me this big stack of his entire work. And I actually apologized the next year to him. I was like, I'm so sorry. I didn't fall to one knee immediately when you approached me.
He did. He felt the knee.
Thanks, Frank forgave me. Okay, so
He's big-hearted like that.
right. So, oh yeah, we're talking about love. You don't have any evidence for love, but you believe love exists. Love is a state of the brain, like happiness or sadness. How do we know those states of the brain exist? Well, because when people are involved in those states of the brain, they behave a certain way. When they're sad, they cry and they frown. When they're happy, they laugh and they smile. And just like other states of the brain, when someone is in love, they behave a particular way. They devote themselves to someone else. They care for someone else. They express it with flowers or chocolate or smooches on the cheek or consensual same-gender intercourse. Whatever. It's a good one. But God is not a state of the brain. Not only do we have plenty of evidence for states of the brain, that's not what God is. God is supposed to be a part of the universe, a tangible part of the universe. Just as tangible as this table that I can reach out and touch. And yet, how much evidence has God given us for this table? Enough that we're all pretty much in unison on it. And yet, which is the more important fact, right? And then I asked her to marry me. Okay, let's get around to wrapping this up because I'm sweaty and I don't want to step on Frank's toes. The last three things really to point out is look at all these different arguments. Most of us have heard all these arguments at one point or another, right? Right? When you're arguing with a religious person and you beat one of their arguments, they don't stop there and say, you know what, you're right, as a general rule. They'll go right on to the next one as if nothing even happened. And then next week when someone is arguing with God with them again, they'll bring up the same argument you just crushed as if nothing happened. Don't let them move the goalposts. Stay on one argument until they either give up or some consensus is reached. Because that's how, you won't necessarily change their mind at the time, but that's how you get emails months later that say, you know what, we talked about this and I thought about it and you were right. That's how you change people's minds slowly, over time. And I think that's part of the reason why people say, oh, you'll never change a religious person's mind, because they're not changing it in the course of one conversation. It takes time. You got to plant the seed, as religious people say. They're right about that. The other thing to point out, of the two remaining, the last argument you'll get here is, they'll say to you, can you not admit that at some point in the future we might find a good reason to believe in God? And the answer is yes, we might. And at that point we'll change our mind, but not a second sooner. And if you're forging your beliefs based on information you admit we don't have yet, then you're not treating reason as a moral responsibility, and you should be. And the very last thing to point out is, how many scientific papers did I cite in the course of this talk? None. I'm just speaking in plain English that hopefully everybody can get. Believe it or not, this is how 99% of the population discourses, in plain English. This is how you reach people. Could I cite 50 million papers for each one of these? Yes, I could. I do this for a living. But I want to communicate. And that's what you need to do with people. They need to see you as a peer, as a human being. And so if you're busting out all this polysyllabic language to try to impress them, you're not communicating. Communicate as you and as simply as possible. And the last thing to point out is, you don't need 4 PhDs in everythingology to have these conversations. You can just do it with the people who approach you on the street, and if you're in the South, they'll do it. Or whenever religion gets brought up. But we shouldn't be averse to talking about it. Because that's the first step, is convincing people it's not true. The second step, which is what the atheist movement is starting to do now, which is why the work of people like Marissa and Ron and Sam, Candace, Brad, is so important. There are atheists in churches right now. They don't believe anymore. But they're worried that their children won't have a place to make new friends. They're worried they won't have a new place to land to be social. And that's why those damn billboards are so important. Because they announce to people that there's a place for them. They're not the only one. That's how you get them to leave church. It's not changing their mind. It's creating a place for them to be. And that's another reason why I'm so touched and flattered to be asked to come speak at things like this. Because this is what's laying the foundation for a better future, where more atheists come out of the closet. Are you not entertained? But it gives people the ability to use one of the greatest arguments for God's non-existence ever, and it's coming out of the closet. That is something the gay rights movement has so right. They're encouraging people to come out of the closet and making it safe for them to do so. Because believe me, I can beat someone's ass in religious arguments from now till the dawn of time, but that won't do a whole lot for making them realize that atheists aren't bad people. But right now, with gay people coming out of the closet all across the country, Americans are realizing, a lot of them for the first time in their lives, that not only do they know gay people, they like gay people. And atheists have to do that. We have to create a scenario where people can safely come out of the closet without all the social penalties that churches and religious institutions have placed upon them. So that people can realize for the first time in their lives that not only do they know atheists, but they like atheists. And atheists are good people. And that's something you can't do with arguments. It's something you make happen with shit like this. And just by being here, you guys are creating an environment that religious people will be coming to year after year, new religious people as they leave church. That's activism. And it's just by being yourselves in groups like this. So thank you for what you do, and thank you for having me.
Don't go away. Don't go away.
No. Free will, motherfucker.
For a coda encore or whatever, just a minute. I really am an interloper here today. I had volunteered to show you a rather comical video that I prepared for the new atheist television channel, the Roku channel, that'll be inaugurated at the end of next week. And so, Stephen and Danny, if you could set up everything back there while I say just a couple words.
If you're asking me to hang around, help set up.
No. But anyway, that'll be kind of a post-dessert or
He's
something
waiting
like
to embarrass me for not knowing who he was.
No, but anyway, that's going to take them a while to set that up. And I know there are a lot of things that you really wanted to do. And by the way, I didn't realize you had a PowerPoint. I think we could have set it up on my system. If I known that.
You know, honestly, for more intimate gigs like this, I'd rather just speak.
All right, whatever. But anyway, if you had something else that you wanted to say in your formal lecture, go ahead and do that while they're setting everything up. But what I would like to hear you talk about is why you are blogging, what are your aims, what has been your experience in blogging. This is something that's happened very late in my life.
Pay the bills.
Yeah, okay. Well, how do you do it? I mean, how do you do it? Tell us all about it.
Okay. And yeah, if you guys want to do a Q&A while that's setting up, I don't mind hanging around to answer questions. I should have said that. Blogging. For those of you who didn't, I used to be an opera singer for a living once upon a time. And I was in a cast with a bunch of young people who all had blogs on the Zanga network, which is high school shit, let me tell you. And they convinced me to get a blog, so I did. And like everyone else blogging, like, oh, cute boy in English class looking at me today, and I'm like, here's all the science behind global warming. I was way out of place. But I really enjoyed doing it, and I kept doing it. Okay, so when you talk about blogging, and if you ask me like how I got into doing it for money, I was very lucky. It's probably one of the most often asked questions I get in email. I blog. I want to do it for money. How do I do it for money? And I tell those people your motivation is completely wrong. Blogging and writing needs to be something you do because it's cathartic, because you want to learn how to communicate. It needs to be something you would happily do for free, because that's when you're good at it. If you're just self-promoting, you've really got your priorities wrong. So if writing's something you want to do, just work and get better at it. I got really lucky. For those of you who don't know, I was the founder of the Skepticon conference, and I ran it for its first 3 years. And that got me, activism. If you're doing it right. That got me national attention, which brought people to my blog. So I very much lucked out. It's a crapshoot, even if you're really good. So I talked about, there's people in this room who have done greater work and are doing more important work and who are better at it than I am. And there's probably better writers here. A lot of it's just a roll of the dice. But you never win the lottery if you don't buy a ticket, right? As far as my experience with it, it's weird. And I've talked to a couple people about this. Like I try not to be a pretentious person, and when you're a public figure in any movement, in atheism, like last month my blog had 170,000 unique readers, so like a lot of people read me. When I go to conferences, people recognize who I am. And when you're growing up, you think like, oh, that's cool, like pseudo-fame would be so great, everyone telling you you're awesome. And it's flattering, but it's so strange. Maybe there are people who are better suited to adjusting to it than I am. But like I don't view myself as anything particularly special. And as I was telling Everett, what I really hate, I'm stuck here bitching about how great I have life. When I meet people at conferences like this, and they come up to me, like so often what I get is someone trying to impress me. And I don't want that. Like, I want to interact with someone and find out what their favorite food is, what activism they're doing, what makes them tick. I want to meet another person. Like, I want a friend. I don't want a fan. And so often it's so hard to get past the impulse to present whatever caricature they think will impress me the most. And it prevents me from getting to know people, like, as they really are. And that's weird. It's a silly thing to complain about, but it's really weird. And also, anytime you do something, what did Churchill say? You have enemies. Good. You've done something with your life. Yeah. And anytime you're fighting for change, you're going to make enemies. And I found there are particular portions of the atheist movement who are very quick to brand enemies of people who are on their side on pretty much every issue. And for a while, I felt really bad about that. Like I was doing something wrong that was costing me these friendships and allies. And then I realized that, even in atheism, not everybody's going to be rational, not everybody's going to be good, and you just have to let your own conscience be your guide. So that's pretty much my experience with it. So it comes down to learning not to live for people's approval, and learning to have this influx of constant compliments as a public figure, and try to not, and be aware that it could go to your head, and try to not let it go to your head. And hopefully I've succeeded. I hope.
Are there any counter blogs specifically aimed against you?
Oh, not in the title. But I've certainly, I suspect I'm not good enough on feminism or gay rights for several blogs on a particular network. Sir?
Are you involved in any local groups in your new environs there in Kansas?
I am. I don't think I could ever live with not being an activist. In fact, the hardest thing for me to do, because Skepticon was my baby, and there are lots of people who stagnate because they build up something great and then don't have the fortitude to let it go. And I can empathize with that. So the hardest thing for me to do right now is not to try to be the leader in everything. Because of my position within the atheist movement, I probably could be if I asserted myself. But you have to give other people the chance to become activists, to learn how to be better activists, and you really need to get out of the way. So yeah, I'm involved, I attend. If they need some small responsibility taken care of, I'll do that. But I want to lead, but I don't want to lead anymore.
There's a name for that, by the way, JT. It's called the Founder Syndrome.
Founder syndrome. I have the founder syndrome. I'm going to get treatment next month.
No, you meant
that treatment will be lots and lots of booze. just alcohol in a syringe. But I'm involved with the college group in Lawrence, Soma, with KC Oasis and the KC Freethinkers in Kansas City.
Cool.
And that's another question I get is like, how do I be a better activist? It's not just arguing with religious people. Some people are extremely shy and introverted, and they sew quilts to sell online and then donate the proceeds to atheist groups. That's a way to help. Marissa is, every time I meet her, she's somewhat introverted. I don't know if that... Okay, well, never mind that.
She's not introverted.
You're always so quiet around me. Okay.
It's just you.
Okay. She's cowed by my manly physique. But those people can run groups that give religious people a place to land, and that's something they can do. There's a million different ways you can make a difference, and I always say do whatever fits your personality. But every now and again, do something that pushes you just a little bit. Back in you may not believe this. When I'm in an environment like this, I tend to be on, because I want to. If there are any fans there, I want to meet them and I want to give them my time. I want to make them feel special because they are special to me. But it's hard to make them feel that because normally I'm a very introverted person. I'm very quiet, and it doesn't convey that very well.
I'll agree.
Right.
We observed it today.
Yeah,
He's very introverted.
I'm normally a very quiet, introverted person. But when I was in college. The person in our group that debated with people wasn't there one time, and there was a street preacher out, so it kind of defaulted to me, and I found out I was decent at it, and now it's become what I've done with my life. So find little ways to push yourselves, and find out if there's a part of your personality that's really greatly suited to one thing that you didn't know about before. You are the Christ, yes, the great Jesus Christ. Prove to me that you're no fool. Walk across my swimming pool, and if you do that for me, then I'll let you go free. Come on!
on, King of the Jews.